Flight attendant questions black mother's baby. Shocking video goes viral. Airline apologizes. It was a typical day in the airport terminal. The usual hum of travelers, the sound of luggage wheels rolling across the polished floor, and the flight attendants making their rounds. Most passengers were preoccupied with their own lives, focused on their travel plans, and the mundane yet crucial task of boarding the plane. But Jamila Walker's experience would turn this seemingly routine moment into a painful confrontation that no one expected. Jamila, a young black mother, had just boarded the flight with her son, Malik, who was nestled comfortably in her arms. Malik, only 6 months old, was her pride and joy. He had bright, curious eyes and a gentle smile that would melt anyone's heart. For Jamila, the flight was nothing more than a simple journey to visit family, a momentary escape from her demanding work life. Little did she know that the next few minutes would challenge her sense of identity, motherhood, and humanity. As Jamila settled into her seat, carefully placing Malik in her lap, the flight attendants began their final rounds, ensuring that everything was in order before takeoff. That's when Rachel, one of the flight attendants, approached. Jamila barely noticed her at first, just another employee doing her job. But when Rachel's eyes lingered on her and Malik, Jamila felt an uncomfortable sense of scrutiny. Rachel, a woman in her early 30s with a sharp, almost clinical demeanor, tilted her head slightly and asked in an unexpectedly cold voice, "Is that your baby?" Jamila blinked, taken aback by the question. She smiled politely, thinking it was a simple mix-up, but Rachel's tone carried an undercurrent of suspicion. "Yes, of course, he's mine," Jamila responded, a little surprised by the question, but Rachel's expression didn't soften. She took a step closer, as though measuring Jamila's response, before asking, "Could you provide some proof? Like an ID or something?" The words hung in the air like an accusation, as Jamila's confusion turned to shock. She stared at Rachel, searching for any sign of humor, any indication that this was a misunderstanding. But there was none. Jamila's first instinct was to dismiss it, to chalk it up to a bad joke or poor professionalism. But the reality of the situation hit her hard. She was being questioned. Her ability to be a mother, her bond with her child, was now being put under scrutiny simply because of her skin color. Rachel stood there, waiting expectantly, clearly unconcerned with the discomfort she had caused. Jamila could feel the heat rising in her chest, a combination of indignation and disbelief. She couldn't understand why she, of all people, was being singled out. "Excuse me?" Jamila asked, now standing up, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and confusion. "What do you mean, prove it?" "He's my son! Why would I need to prove that?" Rachel's response was a dismissive shrug, as though this was standard protocol. "Just a policy. You understand." Jamila looked around at the passengers nearby. Some had noticed the exchange, their eyes flicking over with curiosity, others pretending not to hear, but the damage had already been done. She was being treated differently because of her race, her appearance, and now she had to prove her right to be with her own child. As Malik began to squirm in her arms, his little face scrunching with discomfort, Jamila felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. This wasn't just about a policy. This wasn't about a flight. This was about the daily reality of being a black woman in a world that doubted her, even in moments that should have been the most ordinary and beautiful. Just as the tension began to escalate, a voice from behind Jamila spoke up. A passenger sitting nearby had pulled out their phone and begun recording the entire interaction. They had seen enough. They had witnessed the blatant racism unfolding before them, and now they were documenting it for all to see. The air in the cabin became charged. The flight attendants shifted uncomfortably. The other passengers, realizing something significant was happening, became silent as though collectively holding their breath. Have you ever experienced an injustice in public? What did you do when you were treated unfairly? What would you do in Jamila's shoes? Share your experiences in the comments below. Jamila Walker's life had never been easy, but it had always been hers to navigate. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, Jamila was no stranger to the challenges of growing up as a black woman in America. From an early age, she had learned to navigate the world with grace, but also with an awareness of the discrimination that followed her everywhere. The constant need to prove her worth, to work harder, speak more eloquently, dress a certain way to avoid being judged, was something that she had grown accustomed to. Growing up, Jamila watched her mother, a single parent, fight to provide for her family. Her mother worked 2 jobs, taking pride in her work while simultaneously facing the harsh realities of systemic racism. She had taught Jamila that while the world would often try to silence her, it was important to speak up. She learned the value of education, hard work, and standing up for what was right. These values shaped her into the woman she had become. When Jamila gave birth to Malik, her life changed in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. Malik was her joy, her reason for being. As a single mother, she was determined to provide him with the life her mother had always dreamed of for her. She worked as a high school teacher, balancing the demands of the classroom with the responsibilities of raising a child on her own. It wasn't easy. There were days when she was physically and emotionally exhausted, but she found strength in her son's laughter, his smile, and the simple moments they shared. Jamila had always known that Malik would face challenges in his life. But she had hoped that the world would be different for him, that his skin wouldn't matter in the same way it had mattered for her. She had dreamt of a world where he wouldn't have to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. But today, as she stood in front of Rachel, she realized just how far that dream was from reality. Rachel Turner, on the surface, seemed like the perfect employee. She had joined the airline straight out of college and quickly moved up the ranks. By all accounts, Rachel was a hard-working professional woman. She prided herself on her efficiency, her punctuality, and her ability to handle high-pressure situations. But deep down, Rachel was blind to her own privilege. She had been raised in a predominantly white middle-class neighborhood, where systemic racism was rarely discussed or even acknowledged. Rachel had been taught to believe that success came from hard work alone, that everyone had an equal chance to succeed. What she didn't understand was that for people like Jamila, the game was rigged from the start. It wasn't just about working hard, it was about overcoming barriers that had been put in place long before they were even born. Rachel's encounter with Jamila wasn't just a personal misunderstanding. It was a reflection of the deep-seated prejudices that she had never been forced to confront. To Rachel, Jamila was simply another black woman. And in her mind, people like Jamila didn't always belong in spaces like this one, spaces that were designed for the elite, even if that elite was just a mother flying with her child. Rachel wasn't malicious. She wasn't consciously racist. But that didn't change the fact that her actions were rooted in the bias that she had never challenged. And when Jamila stood up to her, Rachel was forced to confront the reality of her own ignorance. The airplane was a cramped space, one that forced people together in close quarters. The air was thick with the scent of food, recycled air, and the occasional whiff of perfume. As the flight attendants made their rounds, handing out snacks, filling drink orders, and checking in on passengers, Jamila settled into her seat, trying to comfort Malik as he began to squirm. She had hoped the flight would be uneventful, just a quiet ride with her baby. But the small, oppressive feeling of discomfort that had started when Rachel approached her only grew. The passengers around them were silent for the most part, but Jamila could feel their eyes on her. She could feel the judgment, the discomfort, and the subtle whispers as they watched the interaction unfold. Some passengers, those who had seen Rachel's actions, had already begun pulling out their phones, documenting the exchange. Others watched with a mixture of curiosity and unease, unsure how to react. Jamila couldn't help but feel like she was being put on trial. Her motherhood, her worth, and even her identity were being questioned by someone who didn't even know her. The tiny, seemingly innocuous interactions were suddenly magnified, and Jamila was forced to confront the world she lived in. She wasn't just flying from one place to another. She was battling an invisible system that was designed to keep people like her in their place. As the minutes passed and the tension in the cabin escalated, Jamila began to feel the weight of the situation settle in. The flight attendants continued their duties, but there was a marked shift in their behavior. They no longer seemed neutral. They were now part of the problem. Rachel had walked away, but Jamila could still feel her gaze lingering. She had made her judgment, and now Jamila was left to navigate the uncomfortable space between them. Jamila's initial shock had turned to anger. She wanted to scream, to confront Rachel, to demand that she apologize. But more than anything, Jamila wanted her son to know that no matter what, he was loved and protected. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for Malik, for every child who would grow up facing the same biases. Just as Jamila prepared to stand up and demand an explanation from Rachel, the voice of a fellow passenger broke the tension. "Hey," a man called out from across the aisle, his phone held up. "I'm recording this." Jamila, caught off guard, turned toward him. The man, a middle-aged white man with a serious expression, nodded as he continued recording. "This is wrong," he said firmly. "You shouldn't have to prove anything." The camera was rolling now. Jamila knew that this moment would be shared with the world. The power dynamics were shifting. What had started as a small, oppressive interaction was now being exposed for everyone to see. As the plane made its descent into their destination, Jamila's phone buzzed. It was a message from her husband, Michael, and it only read, "I've already made the call. Michael Turner will be in touch." Jamila's heart skipped a beat. Her husband, Michael, wasn't just any businessman. He was the owner of the airline. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just a passenger being mistreated. She was the wife of the man who controlled the entire company. She had the power to change this. This wasn't just about a single flight. It was about sending a message that would resonate throughout the entire industry. As they landed, Michael's presence was felt. The door opened and security stepped aside as Michael, calm but determined, walked straight onto the plane. "Is there a problem here?" Michael's voice rang out across the cabin. The flight attendants, frozen in shock, didn't answer immediately. Rachel's face drained of color as she saw him approach. She knew instantly who he was. Michael Turner, the airline's owner. Michael stood tall, exuding authority and control. "I don't appreciate seeing my wife and child treated like this. You've violated the trust that passengers place in this airline," he said, his voice even but heavy with power. Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had no defense. Michael continued, his words clear and unyielding. "Effective immediately, you are suspended, and you will not be working for this airline again. This type of behavior is unacceptable, and we will make sure it doesn't happen again." The passengers watched in silence as the gravity of the situation sank in. The power dynamics had shifted entirely. The flight attendants were no longer in control. Michael Turner, with his influence and authority, had ensured that Rachel's actions would have consequences. The media quickly picked up the story. News outlets reported on the viral video of Jamila's confrontation, and social media exploded with outrage. The story of a black mother being asked to prove her child was hers became a symbol of the systemic racism that still ran rampant in many industries. Michael Turner's quick and decisive action to remove Rachel from her position sent a clear message to the airline's employees and the public. Racism would not be tolerated. Not in his company, not anywhere. For Jamila, the incident was a turning point. She had spoken up, and her actions had created a ripple effect that led to real change. The airline began rolling out new diversity and inclusion training for its staff, focusing not just on racial sensitivity, but on dismantling bias at every level of the organization. The lesson from this story is simple. No one should be made to feel inferior because of their race, their background, or the color of their skin. Jamila's story shows us that we all have the power to challenge injustice when we stand together. Her courage in the face of systemic discrimination sparked a change that will be felt for years to come. What would you do if you were in Jamila's shoes? Have you ever witnessed or faced discrimination in a public setting? How did you handle it? Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue to fight for equality together. If you believe in standing up for what's right, like, comment, and subscribe. Share this story with your friends and family to spread the message of accountability, respect, and change. Together, we can make sure everyone has the right to feel seen, heard, and respected.